After I died, my parents signed the organ donation consent form on my behalf and donated my retinas to Grace, their most beloved adopted daughter. Grace married my biological brother, and they finally became a real family. I had fought against Grace all my life, only to end up with nothing, left with a tragic and lonely ending. Given a second chance, I decided to live my life for myself, but unexpectedly walked into a happy ending. I was reborn on the very day Grace first arrived at our home. Chapter 1. If I had come back a little earlier, maybe I could have prevented the death of Grace's biological parents, or perhaps forced my parents to reconsider adopting her by threatening them with my own life. But now she had already arrived. No matter how much I resisted, it was too late. Grace was the daughter of my father's mentor, a well-known painter who had her late in life and doted on her like a pearl in the palm of his hand. She showed exceptional talent in art from an early age but suffered from a rare eye condition that caused her vision to fluctuate, with the risk of permanent blindness at any moment. Her parents took her all over the country seeking treatment, but both died tragically in an accident, leaving young Grace alone in the world. Her childhood was filled with tragedy. The moment my parents saw her, they decided to treat her as their own, perhaps even more dearly than their actual daughter. Camila, didn't you always want an older sister? From now on, Grace will be your real big sister. Aren't you happy? My parents looked at me with loving eyes, clearly hoping I would sincerely accept my new sister. In my previous life, the 7-year-old me was indeed happy. I thought I had gained another warm-hearted family member and was more than willing to share my love with this gentle-faced sister. I had no idea Grace was a thief. She never planned to share my love, only to steal it all. Camila, Dad said, I know you're a thoughtful girl. Grace's health isn't great. Even though you're the younger one, we need you to help us take care of her. Can you do that for us? Before I could even answer, Grace's eyes were already glistening with tears. I know it must be hard for little sister to accept me. Who would want to share their parents' love with someone else? Don't worry, sis. I'll just go back to the orphanage. Sometimes I seriously wondered if Grace had been reborn too. How else could an 8-year-old be this manipulative? I hadn't even objected yet, and she had already slapped the label of jealous brat on me. Mom gently wiped Grace's tears, her heart aching. Grace, don't cry. It's bad for your eyes. And stop calling us uncle and auntie. We told you. From now on, we're your mom and dad. Grace lifted her delicate little face, her long lashes still sparkling with teardrops. Her expression of overwhelmed gratitude made anyone who saw her feel sorry for her. Woo-woo. I finally have a mom and dad. And just like that, the three of them embraced and sobbed together. No one remembered to ask for my opinion. Grace just had that kind of power. Chapter 2. That night, my parents had me share a room with Grace. I lay there quietly, unable to sleep, my mind racing with plans on how to become independent and leave this house as soon as possible. After everything I had been through in my past life, I understood one thing very clearly: the moment Grace barged into this family, my dad, mom, and even my brother became hers alone. Late into the night, Grace quietly slipped out of bed. I squinted my eyes and pretended to be asleep, watching as she tiptoed straight to my parents' bedroom. Woo-woo. Daddy, Mommy, it's so dark, my eyes hurt so much. I'm scared. My sympathy-blinded parents never stopped to think, how could Grace, in such a completely unfamiliar environment, manage to find their bedroom so smoothly during a sudden eye flare-up? They only held her tightly, their hearts aching with pity, their eyes filled with tears. Don't be scared, Grace. Daddy and Mommy are here. Grace trembled as she buried herself in Mom's arms, putting on a look like she'd just been terrified. Daddy. Mommy, can I really stay in this house? Woo-woo, just now. Little sister. Hearing this from the hallway, my heart sank. The next second, my father stormed into my room and yanked me out of bed, despite the fact that I was still pretending to be asleep. What did you say to Grace? Why are you being so unreasonable? Grace has been frail since she was little, and she's had such a pitiful life. Can't you just be a little kinder to her? Don't be too harsh. My mom chimed in. Camila is still young. She'll understand with time. But even as she said that, she clung tightly to Grace, without the slightest intention of coming over to shield or comfort me. In the end, They took Grace back to their own bedroom and left me, still in my thin pajamas, locked out in the hallway. My mom used to check on me in the middle of the night, tucking me in before she left. But now they had already forgotten that I was just a 7-year-old child too. I was scared of the dark, scared of the cold. And this was when I needed their love the most. In my past life, Grace used this tactic all the time. She would pretend her eye condition was flaring up, then take advantage of my self-righteous pushover parents' sympathy to spin some completely fabricated lie and dump it all on me. Even as a child, I started to sense the threat. Ever since she arrived, I went from being the sweet and lovable little daughter to the bad girl in my parents' eyes. So I began fighting her in secret, competing with her in everything. Whatever Grace had, I had to have too. Grace was a master of putting on a show in front of others, gentle, timid, always gracious. That only made my parents feel even more indebted to her. I spent a lifetime fighting with Grace, but I could never win. Even my brother, who used to love me the most, eventually fell under her spell. Everyone in the art world knew about the Lee family's 2 daughters, the pitiful, gifted adopted girl Grace, and the jealous, brainless, troublemaking Camila. But in this life, I've decided I won't fight Grace anymore. I'm going to live the life I truly want. Chapter 3. Early the next morning, I heard laughter and cheerful voices from Grace and my parents coming from the dining room. I quietly walked downstairs and saw Grace sitting in my seat, eating with my favorite utensils. The moment they saw me, the previously warm and joyful atmosphere instantly turned awkward, as if I were the outsider who had barged into their family. A flash of embarrassment crossed my mother's face. Camila, why are you up so early today? Grace doesn't have her own utensils yet, so she used yours for now. Would you mind using your brother's set today? I don't want to. I'm not a fan of taking things that belong to others. The moment those words left my mouth, everyone knew I was throwing shade at Grace. My dad, who still hadn't forgiven me for supposedly bullying Grace the night before, immediately darkened. His usual kind expression turned harsh. I glanced at the table. Milk, sandwiches, bacon and eggs, all Grace's favorites. I'm lactose intolerant. Normally, I have congee for breakfast. Oh no, I forgot you can't drink milk. I'll make you some soy milk in a bit. My mom quickly stepped in to smooth things over, clearly trying to hide the fact that she cared more about her adopted daughter than her own. Clang! My father slammed his cup on the table and snapped impatiently. Why so picky? You've spoiled her too much. That's why she's become so unreasonable. We've got to take Grace to her new school for transfer paperwork today. We don't have time to waste. If this were the old me, I would have been heartbroken. I would have thrown a tantrum, cried, screamed. But now, I just felt numb. I quietly sat in a corner of the table, watching Grace lower her head as she ate, though the slight smirk on her lips betrayed her satisfaction. But when she looked up again, her face was already filled with sadness. Daddy, don't say that about little sister. She's not like me. She's grown up being cherished like a little princess. If she's a bit spoiled, that only shows how much you love her. My self-righteous pushover parents were once again moved to tears. How could such an angelic little girl exist? Compared to her, I was the ungrateful, spoiled brat who had everything and still didn't appreciate it. The disappointment returned to their eyes when they looked at me, but I didn't care. In my past life, I had nearly severed ties with my parents anyway. Their opinions no longer mattered to me. Sure, I could play the obedient, simple-minded little sister who did everything to please Grace. That way, I'd still be the good daughter and maybe get a few crumbs of love that fell from their affection for her. But I would let Grace know this: everything she schemed and struggled to steal from me, all the family and love she fought for, meant absolutely nothing to me. Chapter 4. By the time the happy family of 3 returned from Grace's school transfer registration, I had already moved out of my original room, taking all my belongings to the unused maid's quarters. It wasn't about giving up space to Grace, it was just about preserving a little privacy for myself. Dad gently patted my head and said, "Camila, you're such a thoughtful girl, truly Daddy's good daughter." A young child might beam with joy at those words, but having lived one life already, I understood the subtext all too well. Only if I was as full of sympathy for Grace as they were, only if I constantly sacrificed my own happiness for her, would I qualify to be his good daughter. Grace barged into my room without asking, eager to look around. When she saw the full set of art supplies Mom and Dad had once bought for me, Her face turned pale. Then she threw herself into Mom's arms, crying softly, "Woo-woo. I wish I could paint freely like little sister." Mom looked at me, clearly conflicted. After hesitating for a long time, she still opened her mouth and said, "I'm sorry, Camila. Could you put away your art supplies for now, just to take care of Grace's feelings?" Here we go again. Ever since Grace arrived, my personal space had been shrinking, and now, even my hobbies and dreams were being pushed out. In my past life, it was the same. Grace couldn't paint for long periods due to her eyesight, so I was constantly asked to cut back my own time with art. I was the daughter of a painter, yet I couldn't freely buy art materials or attend training classes, because if Grace saw it, she might get upset. And yet, Grace could snuggle in Dad's arms, learning to paint with his hand guiding hers. Every single one of her pieces would be beautifully framed, while my own drawings were buried at the bottom of my old art case. Even when we were both taking the entrance exam for the art university, arguably the most important moment, Grace had a sudden vision flare up mid-exam and didn't finish her work. Afterward, she swapped the name labels on our paintings before turning them in. When the results came out, I instantly recognized that the outstanding portfolio marked with Grace's name was actually mine. I begged my parents to stand up for me, but all they did was hold a hysterically sobbing Grace and tell me to be more understanding. "Camila, worst case, you can just take the exam again next year." But Grace doesn't have time. She could go blind at any moment. She's had such a hard life since she was little. Can't you just give her this one thing? You'll definitely pass next year. So easy for them to say. They had no idea how many hours I spent secretly practicing because I wasn't as naturally talented as Grace. Night after night, I drew in the dark until I nearly ruined my own eyes. I finally broke down and screamed, "She's already stolen my parents, isn't that enough? Now she wants to steal my future too? Give me back my place, or I'll leave this house for good." But my resistance didn't earn me any regret from them. It only earned me a slap, hot and furious, across the face from my father. "If it weren't for Grace's eye condition, do you think you could even beat her? You have no talent in art at all. Even if you got into that school, you'd just be at the bottom of the class." I held my stinging cheek, stunned that such cruel words could come from my biological father. In the end, Grace went to the art university in my place. I became the joke of the entire community, losing to an adopted girl with failing eyesight. My dream of becoming an artist crumbled, and my life slipped into mediocrity. Now, in this second life, I had long since lost the passion for painting. So, right in front of my parents, I tossed that whole set of art supplies straight into the trash. My father's face darkened immediately, but knowing they were in the wrong, he said nothing. He simply left with Grace in tow, visibly annoyed. Chapter 5. When summer break arrived, my older brother James, who usually studied abroad, returned home for a family reunion. The real reason? To meet the legendary new little sister, Grace. Just like in my previous life, James was instantly smitten the moment he saw Grace. She had a piece of cloth draped across her face, stumbling blindly through the living room like a delicate blind girl, then just so happened to fall straight into James's arms. Grace's cheeks turned bright red as she said in a soft, trembling voice, "Since I don't know when I might lose my sight completely, I want to learn how to live in darkness now, so I won't be a burden to Daddy, Mommy, and brother in the future." She really knew how to spin her words. With just a few lines, she subtly pushed me aside as the real sister and hinted that I didn't get along with her. Young and impulsive, James was completely shaken. The girl in front of him was like a fragile drama heroine from a Korean soap opera, evoking instant sympathy. Right then and there, he silently vowed to protect Grace for the rest of his life. Our parents suggested we all go on a day trip to welcome James home. I didn't want to go. They looked like the perfect happy family of four. What did that have to do with me? The petty, jealous, mean, and unloved daughter? But of course, Grace couldn't let me off that easily. She retreated into a corner, letting out soft teardrops like tiny pearls. "Daddy, Mommy, why don't you just take brother and Camila? I'd only ruin your family reunion." James panicked, gently wiping her tears. "Why would you say that? We're already a family." Grace pretended to shy away from his touch, then looked toward me with those teary, timid eyes, a silent accusation. James immediately turned on me with a furious glare. "Camila, why are you bullying Grace? What's wrong with you? You weren't like this before. And what exactly have I become? No, what changed were all of you. The mother who used to be considerate. The father who was strict but gentle. The brother who always stood up for me. You all became people I no longer recognized. I gave a cold laugh, locking eyes with James. Why don't you let Grace answer that? Huh? What exactly did I do to bully her? I even gave her my room. What more does she want? Grace instinctively averted her gaze, guilt flashing in her eyes, but that only fueled James's hero complex further. He yelled at me, completely ignoring logic. It's that arrogant attitude of yours that's hurting her. Grace just got here. You should make sacrifices for her. Suddenly, I had become the villain to be condemned, while James cast himself as the righteous prince defending a helpless princess. My self-righteous pushover parents, of course, took their usual biased stance from the sidelines. Camila, your brother doesn't come home often. Don't make him upset. Apologize to your brother and to Grace. I looked at these people, so biased they could make a compass spin, and answered, firm and clear, Grace can have anything she wants. I don't care. But if you want an apology, not happening. With that, I slammed my door shut, locking out James's furious, impotent shouting. The four of them spent the whole day out, laughing and having fun. Not one of them called to check on me. No one remembered to bring me dinner either. If this had been the old me, I would have been devastated, starving myself or running away to make my parents feel guilty. But now I knew better. It would be pointless. All I'd accomplish was harming my own body. So I cooked myself a hearty bowl of instant noodles, ate in peace, and opened the prep books I had secretly bought. Since my rebirth, I had been studying hard every day. I didn't dare waste a single moment. This time around, I was determined to build a future with my own hands. After careful thought, I had decided I would become a doctor. Chapter 6. At 7 years old, I retained the intelligence of my 20-something self from my past life, which meant I left Grace in the academic dust. Her pathetic little damsel act might work on my self-righteous pushover parents, but it didn't fly with the teachers. In school, failing was failing. No one cared about her sob stories. At the end of the term, I scored first in our entire grade. Grace, meanwhile, was near the bottom. Every time a teacher summoned our parents due to her poor performance, she'd cry and claim the stress had triggered her eye condition. But no matter what, she stubbornly refused to transfer to a special education school. Whenever exam season rolled around, the house would descend into chaos because of her dramatics. To protect Grace's feelings and avoid having her identity as an adopted child looked down upon by classmates, my self-righteous pushover parents decided to attend only her parent-teacher conference, even though both of ours were scheduled for the same day. They couldn't possibly be unaware that their favoritism had made me the laughingstock of my class. I was constantly bullied, called the kid who had biological parents but no love, and every time they needed to wrong me for Grace's sake, they rolled out the same worn-out, mind-numbing line. Grace is weak and has had such a hard life. Can't you just give in to her a little? But I didn't care, because knowledge had given me the greatest strength. In my spare time, I studied far ahead of the curriculum. By the time I was 12, I skipped grades and became the youngest high school student in the city's history. Overnight, I became a household name. Everyone knew the Lee family had a genius daughter. Dad's phone was ringing nonstop with calls from upper-crust families wanting their kids to befriend me, or even talk engagement. But again, to avoid upsetting Grace, he turned down every single dinner and meeting. He never even considered how valuable those connections could be for my future. Of course, how could I ever compare to his precious darling Grace? On the day my admission letter arrived, the school principal and a local newspaper reporter personally came to our home to deliver it. But the only thing that greeted them was the backs of my parents as they rushed out the door. Grace couldn't allow me to steal the spotlight. She simply said she had a headache, and my parents immediately dropped everything to take her to the hospital, without even sparing a second to greet the principal. Even though I had long since given up on those self-righteous pushover parents, a pang of sadness and helplessness still rose up in that moment. The principal looked at me deeply and said with sincerity, "Our school doesn't have a dormitory program, but if you'd like to live on campus, just let me know. I'll make it happen for you." His hand gently ruffled my hair, and it was the first time in forever that I'd felt real warmth and care from an elder. I couldn't stop the tears that slipped down my cheeks, and because of that single tear, I would go on to meet the two people who truly mattered most in my life. Chapter 7. right before the start of the new semester. I couldn't wait to move out of this house that had long been devoid of warmth. On the day I left, my parents, once again, were off at the hospital, sent there by Grace. James was home for the holidays, but he didn't lift a finger to help me pack. He just stood there coldly, watching me shuttle back and forth, finally tossing out a line. Well, the house is finally going to be quiet. I carried the last bag to the taxi without sparing him a single glance. The room the principal had prepared for me was excellent. It looked like an unused teacher's dorm that had been renovated into a cozy studio apartment. It was more than comfortable. I spent the whole day cleaning and organizing the space until it was spotless. Then I headed to the bookstore to stock up on piles of study materials. High school meant heavier workloads, and I was determined to push myself harder than ever to outperform everyone. As I expected, on the official first day of school, I was immediately ostracized by the other students. When they heard the principal had made an exception and given me a dorm room, they instantly branded me as someone with connections. Oh wow. Look! The 12-year-old genius prodigy is here. Think the prodigy will cry for her mommy at night in that dorm all by herself? Let's seat her next to the water dispenser. Maybe she'll want to mix baby formula between classes. These arrogant students resented me because I dimmed their spotlight. For an ordinary teen, their sarcasm might have been crushing, but to me, someone who had lived through a whole lifetime, it was nothing more than childish nonsense. Though I was young, I was tall for my age. I walked straight to the center of the classroom and took the middle seat. Immediately, more unpleasant murmurs followed. Look at her, connections really do make a difference. Even gets to pick the best seat. Who wants to sit next to her? You'd be under the teacher's microscope all day. The students scattered to the sides, leaving me alone in the center. I sat up straight, ignoring every sneer, and calmly opened a prep book. Just then, someone pulled out the chair next to me and sat down. A boy with long, slender fingers reached his hand toward me and said with a smile, "Hi, you must be Camila? I'm Daniel. Mind if I sit here and be your desk mate?" I glanced at him calmly. He had a clean, likable aura, someone clearly popular. You sure? Sitting next to me might get you labeled as a connections kid too. Daniel laughed brightly, leaned closer, and whispered playfully in my ear. Haha, they wouldn't dare. I'm the principal's son. Only then did I notice his facial features resembled the principal's. He must have been told to look after me. Guess the principal anticipated I'd have trouble fitting in. A wave of warmth welled up in my chest. Even if it was just because of the principal, I was willing to get along well with Daniel. After the first weekly test, my sky-high score silenced all doubts. Soon, some of the same students swallowed their pride and came to ask me for help. What started as a rocky high school life quickly turned calm and comfortable. Chapter 8. By the time the weekend arrived, the once bustling campus felt like it was mine alone. I had planned to spend the day studying in the library, but to my surprise, Daniel showed up and knocked on my dorm room door. He and the principal knew I wouldn't be going home for the weekend, and worried that I'd feel lonely staying by myself. They specially came to invite me to lunch. Having lived for so long under the favoritism and neglect of the Lee family, I cherished every bit of kindness that came my way. The warm-hearted principal and the funny, easygoing Daniel made me feel a sense of home I hadn't felt in years. It turned out there were people in the world who thought about me, who truly cared for me. Ever since I enrolled, I spent nearly every weekend with the principal's family. The principal told me that while being diligent was admirable, being overly tense could actually hinder learning. As for the Lee family, I was certain they were enjoying life more without me. They hadn't even bothered to call once to ask me to come home. Through my time with the principal and Daniel, I slowly opened up. For the first time in a long while, I began to rediscover a bit of the innocence and liveliness that someone my age should have had. One day, the principal looked at me gently and said, "I've always wanted a daughter. If only you were mine." No one knew how deeply those words touched me, because in my past life, I had once overheard my father telling Grace, "Grace, you're so gifted in painting. If only you were my real daughter." The memory hit a tender spot, and my eyes welled up with tears once again. Daniel panicked like a cat on a hot tin roof, hurriedly using his sleeve to wipe my face. "Come on. I was just joking. It's not like we're gonna kidnap you, don't cry." But the principal caught the true emotion behind my tears. She couldn't help but gently ask what had really happened between me and my family. When she and Daniel learned about Grace, Daniel was so shocked he nearly dropped his jaw. Your parents chose that drama queen adopted girl over you? Are they brainwashed or something? She's got an eye condition. Sure, but she's not even blind yet. Why does everything have to revolve around her? The principal gave Daniel a light smack on the forehead, warning him to watch his mouth. Then she pulled me into her arms, gently rubbing my back like a real mother. From now on, you'll be my goddaughter. If they don't want such a wonderful child, I do. I clung to her and sobbed uncontrollably, pouring out all the emotions I had buried deep inside. Meanwhile, Daniel mumbled under his breath, "So if she becomes your daughter, that makes us siblings?" Chapter 9. High school turned out to be the most relaxed and peaceful time of my life. I even found excuses to stay in the dorms during most of the winter and summer breaks, claiming I needed more time to study. The Lee parents didn't bother to check in on me either. I heard that during this time, they were busy taking Grace to specialists all over the country and signing her up for every tutoring program imaginable. They were so occupied they practically neglected the family business and even cut down my living allowance significantly. Thankfully, I had already achieved financial independence. I could live perfectly well without a single cent from the Lee family. From a young age, I had a sharp eye for art investment, but in my past life, under the mental manipulation of my father and Grace, I was convinced that turning art into a business was shameful. They always talked about purity in art, yet secretly sold the very pieces I had recommended and never gave me a dime of the profit. In this life, I saw through them early on and instead entrusted my most reliable ally, the principal, to manage my investments. Watching the numbers in my bank book grow steadily brought me a rare sense of security. As expected, having the ability to support yourself is the only true safety net in life. That weekend, the principal and Daniel specially set aside time to take me for a picnic at a nearby park. While the principal went to park the car, Daniel and I headed to the lawn first to secure a good spot. I had been really looking forward to this day, until I saw the last people I ever wanted to run into. There, strolling toward us, were the Lee family. Grace was walking in front, her arm linked through James's. My long-absent self-righteous pushover parents followed behind, chatting and smiling brightly until they saw me. Their expressions froze instantly. The moment Grace laid eyes on me, she shrank back behind James like a frightened little bunny, as if I were some predator about to devour her. That fragile damsel act immediately triggered James's protective instincts, and the way he looked at me turned sharp and aggressive. So much for all that studying. Huh? Looks like someone was lying. Grace's eyes landed on Daniel standing beside me, and she bit her lip, clearly unhappy. "Camila, are you here on a date with your boyfriend? Mommy and Daddy have been so worried about you. You haven't even come home during break. And now you're lying to us? You've changed so much since starting high school." My self-righteous pushover parents looked at Daniel and me in total shock. "Camila, you're still just a child. And you're lying to your parents over some boy? Are you trying to drive us to an early grave? Why can't you be more obedient like Grace?" 4 voices. For accusations, one blame after another piled on me like bricks. No one gave me a chance to explain. Even Daniel, who had already heard plenty about the Lee family's blatant favoritism, was dumbfounded by how rapidly they ganged up on me. Chapter 10. Just then, the principal, having parked the car, hurried over. The moment my parents saw her, they immediately changed faces, smiling obsequiously as if the hysteria moments earlier had never happened. Grace would be entering high school next year. Despite her poor grades, she had delusions of attending the city's top school, which meant they'd soon be begging the principal for a favor. And once Grace realized that Daniel was the principal's son, the shift in her expression was even more obvious. She even subtly let go of James's arm. "I knew it. Camila would never lie to us," she said sweetly. The Lee parents also came to their senses, forcing out some awkward laughs as they apologized, not to me, of course, but mainly out of fear of offending Daniel. "I was just collateral damage. Principal, thank you for taking the trouble to bring Camila out today, even on a day off." Daniel looked at this shameless family, their two-faced expressions flipping faster than a book, and couldn't help but let out a cold laugh. "Camila's parents. Want to guess why we're here for a picnic today?" James, who had clearly noticed Grace eyeing Daniel the whole time, was already in a sour mood. "What else? It's a nice day. We thought it'd be good for Grace to get some fresh He stopped mid-sentence as his eyes finally landed on the cake Daniel was holding. That's right. Not a single person in the Lee family had remembered. It was my birthday. I let out a cold chuckle. Aren't you two so worried about me? Then how come you forgot my birthday? Last month for Grace's birthday. Didn't you throw a party and invite guests? With each sentence I said, my mother's face turned one shade darker. She looked like she wanted to explain, but couldn't get a word out. As for my father and James, they just stood there stiffly. They'd always claimed they treated both daughters equally, so of course they wouldn't dare admit they were blatantly biased. You're the one who never comes home. Even if we wanted to throw you a party, how would we? Daniel stepped forward, shielding me with a faintly hostile gaze toward the Lee family. No party. Fine, but surely you've prepared a gift for Camila, right? You're not just handing out verbal checks, are you? Naturally. They hadn't prepared a single thing, they had completely forgotten, and just as a flicker of guilt began to appear on their faces, Grace's tear ducts kicked into overdrive. Like a faucet she could turn on at will. Woo-woo. Camila, please don't blame Daddy and Mommy. It's all my fault. If I weren't so sick all the time, they wouldn't have to worry so much. They wouldn't have forgotten your birthday. It's okay to hate me. I deserve it. Someone like me shouldn't even be alive. Crying harder. She suddenly staggered dramatically toward us, but both Daniel and I instinctively stepped aside, letting her fall flat on the ground. Grace, the little porcelain doll cherished by the Lee family, had scraped her skin, and just like that, their hearts shattered into 1,000 pieces. James, always the most hot-headed, rushed over and raised his hand at me. Grace fell. Did you push her? That slap never landed. Daniel blocked it cleanly, grabbing James's arm with ease. He worked out regularly, tall and strong, and locked James in place like a twig in a vise. The principal's eyes turned sharp as she looked at my parents, her gaze screaming disappointment. Are you even qualified to be parents? I saw it clearly. This girl fell by herself. How can you hit Camila without a shred of evidence? And after everything you've done to her, you still have the nerve to ask why she doesn't come home? Isn't that laughable? With those scathing words, the principal led Daniel and me far away from the Lee family. She and Daniel worried that I'd lose interest in celebrating my birthday because of what happened, but I had long stopped expecting anything from the Lee family. What truly mattered now was making beautiful memories with those who genuinely cared. We sat by the scenic lakeside, sharing the cake together. The principal gave me a brand new backpack, and Daniel gifted me a little handmade bracelet. The thought of him, big, goofy Daniel, sitting down and clumsily weaving that bracelet made me laugh out loud, which only made him blush furiously and start flailing around in protest. Chapter 11. In the blink of an eye, 2 years had passed, and I was about to graduate from high school. Determined to leave the Lee family behind for good, I decided to study medicine abroad. My academic performance was stellar, and the university was offering me a full scholarship. It wasn't until the acceptance letter arrived at home that the Lee family even realized I was planning to attend college overseas. I originally thought my self-righteous pushover parents would immediately fall back into their old habits and scold me for making such a big decision without consulting them. To my surprise, their attitude had done a complete 180. They suddenly became warm, attentive, and even praised me as a worry-free child. Turned out, Grace had drained the family dry over the past year between endless medical treatments, cram school sessions, and paying hefty bribes to get into a half-decent high school. The Lee family's finances had been gutted. They'd somehow heard about how I'd been working with the principal on art investments and opening a gallery, and now they had the audacity to ask me, a minor, for money. I glanced at James, who had been loafing around ever since graduating from some no-name diploma mill. If the family's broke, how come Big Brother doesn't get a job? I asked, half smiling. Grace quickly jumped in to defend her beloved. James stayed home to take care of me. He had several offers, but he turned them all down for me. She no longer even called him brother. Looks like in this lifetime, without me getting in the way, Grace had locked James down even earlier. I calmly pulled out the bank card I'd prepared long ago. Ever since I was reborn, I had kept track of every cent the Lee family spent on me, including the money I had set aside for their future retirement. I transferred all of it onto this one card. Dad, Mom, let me be clear. This money is for your retirement. If even 1 cent of it is used for Grace, then just consider me no longer your daughter. The The room instantly fell tense. Grace covered her face with both hands and collapsed weakly into James's arms, crying like the world had ended. Lee's dad exploded, sweeping the bank card off the table and stomping on it like it had personally offended him. Pointing at me, he shouted furiously, "Then get out! We don't need a heartless child like you in the Lee family." I didn't even hesitate. I picked up the signed legal documents and left. As I reached the front door, I could still hear Grace and Lee's mom sobbing in each other's arms, like I was the villain who had torn this family apart. But I couldn't resist turning back. My eyes, cold as frost, swept across each of their hypocritical faces. "Heartless?" I said. "Have any of you noticed that ever since Grace came into this house, I haven't appeared in a single family photo?" Lee's dad and Lee's mom turned, stunned, to look at the picture frame hanging in the center of the living room. There they were, smiling warmly, arms wrapped around Grace and James. There was no space left for me in the frame, just like there had never been any space for me in this family. I dragged my tired body back to the dorm. Every interaction with the Lee family left me drained and disgusted. To my surprise, Daniel was waiting for me at my door. He jumped to his feet the moment he saw me, but once we stood face to face, he began circling in place, at a complete loss for words. Finally, Daniel scratched his head awkwardly and held up a letter in his hand. "Camila, let's go abroad together." Chapter 12. Before Daniel and I went abroad, all the preparations were handled by the principal. In this world, only she and Daniel truly held me in their hearts. The night before we left, I stayed up talking with the principal the entire night. She had long seen that Daniel's feelings for me weren't ordinary. But still, she said to me firmly, "Even if you and Daniel don't end up together in the future, you'll always be my favorite daughter." Once I started university, I completely cut ties with the Lee family. But from what I could tell, they were still regularly swiping the bank card I'd left them. Occasionally, I'd hear bits and pieces about the Lee family from old acquaintances, and apparently, they'd run into trouble. During Grace's college entrance exams for the art university, her eye condition flared up again. Since I wasn't participating this time around, she casually picked a well-drawn exam paper and swapped the names. Afterward, she turned on the charm and played the pitiful card, convincing my father, who still had some influence in the art world, to pull strings and help cover it up. But her luck ran out. By sheer misfortune, she had swapped her name onto a test submitted by one of the chief examiner's personal students. Once the forgery was discovered, Grace was disqualified from the exam entirely, and my father's reputation in the art world also collapsed. Because of the cheating scandal, even Grace's previous artworks came under suspicion. Many believed they were ghostwritten. Her carefully crafted image as a fragile artistic genius completely crumbled. Some of her collectors even demanded refunds. Ironically, the same self-righteous pushover father who once adored her like a precious jewel suddenly snapped out of the Grace trance. He stopped defending or doting on her altogether. Perhaps all along, what he really loved most wasn't Grace herself, but the prestige of raising her. Grace couldn't bear the fall from Grace. She and James moved out of the Lee home, and not long after, the two of them announced their engagement. James even mailed me an invitation. I didn't send a cent, and I certainly wasn't going to fly back from overseas to attend. 3 more years passed. Daniel and I graduated and returned to our home country. I continued my medical studies under a renowned professor, while Daniel started his own company and took over management of the art gallery on behalf of the now retired principal. My days as a hospital intern under the professor were intense and hectic. Even so, I still carved out time for dates with Daniel. Life was fulfilling, quiet, joyful, and hard-earned, until one day, that peace was shattered by an uninvited guest. James and my mother barged into the professor's office where I was working, screaming hysterically, "Camila, you have to save Grace." Chapter 13. As it turned out, Grace's vision had continued to deteriorate. She was now nearly blind. Unable to cope with the reality, she had attempted suicide several times, only to be stopped each time by James. "Camila, you're studying medicine now. Your mentor is a top-tier expert. You must be able to cure Grace, right?" My mother collapsed onto me, wailing hysterically. She kept screaming that if Grace died, she didn't want to live either. After learning about the situation, my professor showed a troubled expression. Grace's condition was extremely rare, with almost no documented cases. There had never been a successful cure. Of course, James and my mother had heard these explanations before. After years of chasing after doctors, how could they not understand this reality? But they had already lost all sense of reason, charging at me, shoving and yelling without restraint. How can you be so heartless? You're just going to stand by and let Grace die? I told you, she's always bullied and excluded Grace since they were kids. She was never going to help. You can't even save your own family. What's the point of being a doctor? A selfish person like you doesn't deserve that title. Because my professor thought highly of me, there were always people jealous or unhappy with me. Now the hallway outside was crowded with onlookers, gossiping, pointing fingers, eager to see me get thrown out because of the scandal. Without hesitation, I slapped James across the face. The left side of his face instantly swelled. My mother and the gawkers at the door went completely silent. I'm selfish? I'm heartless? I bullied and excluded Grace since I was a kid? You said Grace was pitiful, so I gave her my room and moved into the maid's quarters. You said she needed more care, so from the age of 7, I walked to school alone. You said her treatments were expensive, so I earned full scholarships and never asked for a single cent in tuition. When Grace so much as sneezed, the whole family rushed her to the hospital. When I had a 39 degrees Celsius fever, no one checked on me. You only attended her parent-teacher conferences. Only remembered her birthdays. Everything Grace ever wanted, I had to give up, even my parents. And you still ask what more I should have given? Yes, she's pitiful, but it wasn't me who made her life tragic. It wasn't me who made her sick. You say I don't deserve to be a doctor? Every prep book I used, I bought with my own money. Every school I entered, I tested into on my own. Every teacher I learned from, I sought out myself. You haven't cared about me for years. Do you even deserve to call yourself a mother? Everything I had bottled up over 2 lifetimes finally exploded in that moment. I spilled every truth I had buried deep inside. The crowd who had just been criticizing me suddenly turned their judgment toward my mother and James. My mother looked like she had aged years in an instant. Maybe all this time she thought she had been balancing things fairly, but in reality, one bowl had long run dry, while the other was overflowing. After venting my heart out, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I finally called security to escort them out. Peace returned to the hospital, but from that day on, my coworkers looked at me differently, like there was a newfound edge of respect, or fear, in their eyes. Chapter 14. After years of relentless effort, I became the youngest attending physician in the history of our hospital. At the same time, the art gallery I co-founded with the principal had grown into a respectable business. Daniel and I never had extravagant desires, so we didn't have much to spend on ourselves. Every year, we donated a large portion of our income to support girls in mountain villages who were forced to drop out of school. From time to time, I still sent support payments to the Lee parents, but aside from that, we had no contact. One day, I happened to see Grace on the street. She was completely blind now, slowly walking with a white cane. Since James had to work, it seemed she had moved back in with the Lee family. The same Grace who used to look at me with that smug, victorious gaze now had only a dull grayness on her face. Back then, the Lee family treated her like a fragile treasure, panicking if she so much as sneezed. But now, they'd left a blind woman alone on the street. I saw a group of kids throwing rocks onto the tactile paving in front of her. I kicked the stones away with one swift motion, but I didn't pity Grace, not one bit. Her situation was entirely of her own making. If she hadn't cheated during her art college entrance exam, maybe she could have maintained that same persona from my past life, the resilient, talented girl who won sympathy and admiration. Maybe the Lee family would have continued treating her like their princess. But no matter how content I was with the life I had now, I had no intention of forgiving Grace for everything she had done to me. I picked up my phone and called Daniel, inviting him and the principal to dinner that evening. The Lee family no longer mattered to me. They, Daniel and the principal, were my real family, the two most important people in my world. To have a career I'm passionate about, someone I trust with my life, and an elder who truly loves me, these are joys that belong solely to me, and no one can ever take them away.